I first heard the lullaby on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, long before I knew its name. I was unpacking boxes in the attic of my grandmother's old house, dust dancing in the weak sunlight, the smell of mothballs and damp wood heavy in the air, when I spotted it half buried under yellowed newspapers, a small, tarnished music box shaped like a miniature carousel. My fingers brushed its cold brass surface, and I felt a slight thrum beneath the metal, as if it were still wound tight from some long-forgotten twist of the key. I wound it out of curiosity, expecting a cracked spring or silence, but instead a single, trembling note rang out, soft and warped. Then another and another, until the carousel horses began their silent, impossible dance. The sound was achingly familiar, like a half-remembered lullaby from childhood, a melody I felt in my bones but could not place in my mind. As it played, the attic floorboards moaned under an unseen weight, and I smelled ozone and old velvet, a scent that carried with it a pulse of something urgent, alive. At first, I told myself it was nostalgia, the house's thick air bending memory into a phantom song. But when I set the box down, the tune lingered in my ears, echoing through empty shelves and ducking behind cobwebbed trunks. I climbed down the narrow ladder, the walls closing in around me, and carried the music box into the hallway, where the light from the window caught a crack in its lid, revealing a sliver of handwritten inscription, "Lullaby for the Lost." My heart stuttered. Lost. The word pried at something buried, an absence so deep I could almost feel it churning in my throat. I tucked the box under my arm and tiptoed down the creaking staircase, each step alive with the box's echo. By the time I reached the dusty living room, its melody had grown imperceptibly slower, as if the box itself hesitated to show me more. I paused under the chandelier, its crystals dull and lifeless, and wondered why my grandmother, a stoic woman who rarely spoke of her past, would hide this in the shadows above. I realized then that my search for answers had already begun. I cradled the music box against my chest, as if it were a fragile heart of its own, and I understood with sharp clarity that nothing would ever be the same once the next note slipped into silence. I spent the rest of the afternoon rifling through my grandmother's things, old diaries, brittle letters tied with faded ribbon, a collection of photographs of children I didn't recognize, their eyes hollow with unspoken sorrow. Every time I reached for something, the music box's faint, unplaceable hum seemed to pulse through the walls, as though it were calling me back upstairs. I paused in the corridor, breath catching, and noticed the air turn sickly sweet, like overripe fruit in damp earth. My skin prickled with a sudden chill, and the floorboards groaned behind me, though I was alone. I hugged the box tighter, determined to learn who had wound it last. By dusk, I had unearthed a yellowed journal tucked behind a boarded-up section of the attic wall. Its leather cover crackled under my fingertips, and the pages exhaled a musty breath as I opened it. In elegant script, my grandmother wrote of a lullaby she had first heard as a child, played for her by a distant relative she could never name at dusk falls in a hidden room. She described the same ozone scent, the cold spots, the carousel's ghostly rotation. She called it the song that remembers you, and warned that once you listened, you could never unhear its secrets. My heart hammered. I read her final entry, dated 60 years ago. Tonight I will lock the box away. Tomorrow, I may not remember why. Night came quickly in that old house, swallowing the windows until only the glow of a single lamp pierced the gloom. I carried the journal and music box into the study, hoping the familiar comfort of books lining shelves would steady me. But as I opened the box, its lid creaked dust into the lamplight, and the lullaby began again. Slower this time, each note stretched, distorting like a reflection in rippling water. My grandmother's warning echoed in my mind. Once you listen, you can never unhear. I pressed my palms over my ears, but the melody seeped through bone and sinew, threading into my heartbeat. Suddenly, the music halted, leaving behind a residue of silence so dense it pressed against my eardrums. In that stillness, I heard something else, a soft scuffle behind the bookcase. My breath caught in my chest. I told myself it was rats, or the house settling. But the hairs on my neck rose as a single floorboard groaned under weight. Not mine. The room grew cold, unbearably cold, and the lamp flickered, sending shadows dancing like mournful dancers across the spines of books. I forced my legs to move toward the sound, each step hesitant, each breath visible in the freezing air. I reached the bookcase and found a narrow gap, just wide enough for a hand. I slid the journal into the opening, and the wood shifted, revealing a hidden door. My pulse thundered in my ears. The box vibrated in my grip, as though urging me not to proceed, but I needed the truth. I yanked the door open and peered into darkness deeper than night itself. A faint, pulsating glow emanated from within, blue-green light that smelled of metal and earth. The lullaby began again, muffled, distant, as if traveling up from some subterranean chamber. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The hidden room was small, its walls slick with damp, and at its center stood a makeshift cradle draped in moth-eaten cloth. On its mattress lay a torn scrap of faded fabric with my grandmother's initials faintly stitched in one corner. The music box rested atop a low pedestal beside the cradle, its brass now gleaming as though newly polished. I felt my breath freeze in my lungs. I realized the cradle had held something alive once. Someone whose lullaby had become a trap, a tether pulling generations back into this hidden place. I reached out to touch the box, but a sudden gust of frigid air snuffed out the glow and plunged me into pitch black. The melody swelled behind my eyes, louder, urgent. My goal to uncover the lullaby's origin had brought me here, but I had crossed a line. There was no turning back. The cradle creaked. A whisper of breath grazed my ear. The last thing I felt was the music's cold caress. And then I knew I was no longer merely its listener, but its next keeper. The darkness pressed against my eyelids like damp cloth, and I realized with a start that I was kneeling beside the cradle, the music box still clutched in my trembling hand. My breathing echoed off the stone walls, each exhale a mist in the frigid air. The lullaby seeped upward from the box now, slower, each warped note winding around me in invisible coils. I dared to lift the lid. Inside, the tiny carousel horses were gone. Only a faint imprint in the tarnished brass remained, as if they had never existed. A low groan rattled the hidden door behind me. I spun to see it inch shut on silent hinges. Panic flared, sharp and immediate. The cradle creaked again, though its wood was long rotted. I pressed my palm to its surface and felt a pulse, soft, childlike, beneath the arid dust. My skin prickled with sympathy, then dread. I understood. This room was alive with memory, its walls storing every tear, every whispered prayer. A distant drip of water marked time unkindly. I settled the box on the cradle's edge and slid the journal from my pocket, flipping to the last entry where my grandmother had scrawled a line in jagged ink. The song remembers the child who never grew. The words ignited something in me, an ache I had never known I carried. My grandmother's own loss, buried beneath years of silence, had woven itself into this melody. The lullaby was not a trap, but a promise. Remember, or be remembered forever. The temperature dropped again, and I shivered, fighting the tremor in my fingertips as I wound the box once more. The first note rang out, crisp and unbroken. I closed my eyes, breathed in the scent of ozone and old velvet. and let the song transport me into the heart of a memory that was not mine, of a child's lullaby echoing through an empty house, hoping to be heard. When the melody ended, I knew what I had to do. The cradle's boards groaned under an unseen weight as I rose, resolve hardening inside me. I would unlock the forgotten sorrow at the core of this song, even if it meant laying down my own. Only then could the lullaby rest, and I too find release. I waited until the moon had crept low in the attic window, its pale light pooling like liquid silver across the cradle's ragged cloth. The air was heavy with damp earth and the faint metallic tang of ozone. I set the music box on the cradle's edge and wound it one final time, my fingers slick with sweat. The first note trembled through the silence, and the hidden door behind me groaned open, as though granting passage to something that had only ever waited. I felt an almost electrical charge ripple through my arm, the lullaby's heartbeat in my veins. The attic grew colder still, and I could see my breath swirl in halos before me. I knelt beside the cradle and pressed the box's lid flat, listening to each elongated note. Then I remembered a line from my grandmother's diary: "Sing for her, and she will follow the song home." My voice caught as I began to hum the lullaby, hesitant at first, then with gathering strength, matching the warped cadence of the music box. The floorboards vibrated under an invisible pressure. The cradle rocked. A soft sigh brushed my ear, a child's breath drawn too deeply. My heart pounded so loud I feared it would shatter the melody. In the wavering moonlight, I saw her. A small, half-transparent figure perched on the cradle's edge, her head tilted, eyes hollow yet pleading. The scent of old lace and lilacs drifted through the narrow room. Every sorrow I had ever buried rose in my chest, a tide of empathy and loss. I closed my eyes and finished the lullaby, my voice cracking on the last note. The music box stuttered, then stilled. She reached out, her tiny hand brushing mine, colder than midnight air but gentle as a moth's wing. When I opened my eyes, she was gone. In the hollow silence, I felt the cradle lighten, as if grief itself had been lifted. The attic no longer felt oppressive but open, as though a weight had been released. I realized then that the song had not been a trap, but an echo of a love that refused to fade. I gathered the music box to my chest, its brass warm in my arms, and climbed down into the night with a heart reshaped by memory and mercy. By the time I stepped back into the silent hallway, the first rays of dawn were filtering through the grimy window panes, staining the air a pale gold, and I realized I was no longer the person who climbed those attic stairs. The music box lay heavy in my palm, its weight a reminder of the sorrow I had released, and the responsibility I now carried. I paused, inhaling the damp, lavender-tinged air that lingered from the hidden room, and felt a tender resolve settle in my chest. My fear had given way to a quiet compassion. I understood now that memory is more than a record. It is a promise we keep to those we've loved and lost. As I wound the box one last time, its melody came not as an echo of grief, but as an invitation to remember with kindness, to honor the past without letting it consume the present. And in that gentle, haunting tune, I found a purpose I had never known: to become the keeper of stories, the guardian of echoes that would otherwise fade into oblivion. The attic grew still once more, not empty, but alive with renewed possibility. If you were moved by this journey through memory and loss, please like this video and subscribe to WhisperTales for more hauntingly atmospheric stories that linger long after the lullaby ends.